Okay,
Sure.
all right, so we will get started. It's 2:05, June 21st, 2022. And this is a special meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Did you just leave the meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just making sure, sorry.
Yes, you do it.
Okay. All right, we only have a couple things on our agenda today. First up is a presentation from our transit consultants, but it looks like they're running a little bit late. I've reached out to them to make sure that they are joining us, but we'll walk us through the proposal from them for the contract amendment. And then we also have a professional services agreement, correct? For facilitation with LCOSI. So if it's okay with everyone, do you want to do your LCOSI?
Oh, sure.
First?
Yeah.
If we can just amend the agenda so that we can go through the LCOSI facilitation first, the proposal first, and then that will give our transit consultants just a little more time to join us. And then we'll go through the transit stuff.
Great. So thanks for putting this on primarily for discussion and I guess a consensus moving forward, since I don't think Tim's had a chance to chat in depth with everybody on it. But at our last LCOSI meeting as the group setting priorities, looking at a new iteration of, utilizing LCOSI and partners, it was suggested that we get separate facilitation to have that group discussion with partners. And so I reached out to Marjo Kirkus with Del Corazon Consulting, and she gave us a proposal last Monday. I sent that to you all, and I just was looking for, technically per procurement, I don't think we need a formal approval, but I do want to get your opinion on, approaching the LCOSI group and any kind of request for contribution for the facilitation here. Before I just assume that we will cover that expense. I do think that engaging with Marjo will get us a step further in the general rec master planning and open space conversation, and help us continue to frame what those next steps are from the rec master planning. So I would be okay in covering the whole cost here, and looking towards like a community-wide, county-wide, priority setting and level setting with partners on how to attack the next phase of rec master planning. Any thoughts?
I think it's a good idea just to have that independent facilitation, since there's enough sort of history among with Mike Conlon that it's going to be hard to, I don't think it would be impossible to hard for him to facilitate that, or for us to facilitate that, and sort of push him aside from that role.
Yeah.
So I think in general it's good. I thought I did look it over, and I think sent back to you. I think the hours and scope, the hours kind of match the tasks and seem reasonable for doing all those interviews and synthesizing it and facilitating a meeting. I don't know if it made it in there. I think I lean towards being fine with just covering it ourselves, and then we can really try to make the scope be not just what should LCOSI do next, but what are the county priorities of all the LCOSI partners, just that slightly broadening of the scope. So it's not just about the future of LCOSI.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is, and that's a good, yes. That is exactly what, right?
Yeah.
The overarching priorities and activities happening and into the future, and responding to the forum and how we all utilize the group, which is extremely important. I don't think anybody's debating that.
And I think we sort of tried to do it the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, lost track when I haphazardly wrote that list of county priorities. I think to me the key point is we don't want to be constrained with the current LCOSI strategic plan.
Yeah. Yes,
which doesn't include some of the things we care about in the county.
Right.
So there may be some things that come out of the facilitation that LaCosi is not the right venue to do, and that's fine.
right, yeah,
Okay.
and I think, yeah, the primary goal was just to be able to have everyone participate in that way of what their each agency's priorities are in Lake County. And then maybe where they overlap to have a home and or support, like some level of
Yeah,
monitoring, engagement, support with LaCosi partners. And just what that kind of looks like. But yeah, it wouldn't necessarily restrict or
yeah,
influence across jurisdictions
Okay.
inappropriately.
Yeah. Okay. And the cost of facilitation.
So there was a reaching out to stakeholders, 12 stakeholders.
Okay.
And I might add, well, yeah, 12 listed stakeholders and in-depth surveys and or interviews, I guess I would say. And then hosting a half-day retreat for LaCosi at the next meeting. However, one thing that might need to be revised here is that I was mistaken in the next few LaCosi meetings, and I thought the June meeting was going to be the grand opening of the Crossroads, but that's supposed to happen in July. So I might reach out to Marjo, and also I did reach out to the LaCosi Financial Committee group to let them know I had gotten this and I shared this. But perhaps it's a broader email out to the group and saying, do we want to do this at a regularly scheduled LaCosi meeting or an additional meeting? And then do we want to have it in July? The LaCosi meeting in July is actually the grand opening for the Crossroads Trail. So I think there might unfortunately be a little tweaking in logistics and timing, but
you could also see July being pretty fast to do all the interviews and get ready for that.
she was pretty confident
Maybe,
in like
yeah.
a 2 or 3 week
Okay,
time to
all right.
prepare. But I will reach out to her based on this conversation and firm up some details.
Okay.
And the total cost was like eight.
Yeah, 8,390.
Yeah.
I don't.
Most
have
of
any
that
problem
time being taken in the interviews.
Yeah.
with the stakeholder groups.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. I don't have
Yeah.
any problems or any questions.
Okay, I'll call Marjo. I'll send it out to the bigger LaCosi group to get an idea of, whether or not they still want to participate and when, and then we'll kind of firm up engagement when I hear back from the bigger group. Okay,
Okay.
That's good.
That'll
thank
work.
you very much.
Awesome. I don't have any other questions on that, so I'll entertain a motion for it. If we'd like to make one.
Do we need a motion, or we're just sort of like approving Tim finalizing it, or?
I think maybe we could move to approve moving forward.
Yeah.
Arrangements and engagement based on the LaCosi group.
Yeah, so I move that we approve the small contract to facilitate discussion with the FOSI partners about future coordination and activities.
Okay.
Second?
Any further discussion?
No.
All right, none from me. All right, thanks. All those in.
Actually,
okay,
I'm sorry, maybe we should just say, just so maybe we should say something like not to exceed 10,000 or something, just to give you, if there's some final
Yeah, I
little
think
room or negotiation, or do you feel like that's pretty locked
I
in?
feel like this was a ceiling for sure, but
Okay. Maybe we could see not to exceed 10,000 just in case something comes up,
sure.
come back to us.
Sounds good.
Okay.
That's it. That's a fair thing. Fair.
Okay.
All right, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor?
Hi.
I
Aye. All right, thank you guys so much. Appreciate
you.
that. Okay, Sydney will join us in about 15 minutes, so I'm sorry about that, but I can walk you guys through the proposal. Go ahead. No,
You add that you still have that 24 minutes, right, to add things to your agenda.
For decisions, yeah.
what else do we, what
decisions?
else? Mhm.
Just the main things.
I think since we have a couple minutes, if you want to put that onto an agenda for Thursday morning,
Yeah.
we could do that right before the executive session on Thursday morning.
Mhm.
If everyone's okay with that. Is that timely enough for that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good.
Yes.
All right, so Cindy will be joining us in about 15 minutes. She's calling in. She works for her and Jason from Fehr Peers. They are our transit consultants. And so this is a proposal from them to broaden our scope of work with them and to continue our work with them from feasibility now into preparing for implementation and planning for transit locally. So the transit study will be completed and ready to be submitted to CDOT by the end of June is our deadline. So they're working on putting all of that together, and they will give us a presentation on that this afternoon when they join us. But the additional scope of their work is to get us prepared for that implementation phase. And part of that is that there's kind of a long laundry list of policies, procedures, and compliance documents that are necessary to become eligible for federal transit authority funds and the MMOF funds. So their scope of work for us to expand their contract would include grant writing and coordination for the MMOF funding. They'll assist us with completing the application for county review and submit to CDOT. They will provide 16 hours of labor to provide supporting information to the county for a grant submittal for 5311 funds from the Federal Transit Authority and 5339 capital funds, 16 hours of labor to provide supporting information to the county on the grant submittal for that as well. And then also included in that, we'll develop policies for drug and alcohol, EEO and DVE plan, ADA, Title VI, public participation policy, limited English proficiency policy, transit service standard, FTA clauses and certifications for procurement. So those policies are required by the FTA if you have any kind of transit operating that you operate. So I think that's part of their addition to the scope of this work, which is $16,000 total for them to prepare all of this information for us.
Do we have any of those policies set in place from the granting on the senior center, or no, because it's not a public, like,
Because, yeah,
I mean,
'cause
it's
it's
public
not-
access, but it's not
Yeah,
an open,
right.
okay,
It's not a transit service.
okay.
So we don't have any of those available right now.
Okay.
Summit Stage has their own, but that we fall under for our contracted service with them for the rural route, but we'll have to have our own policies for our local route. Or our regional route, sorry, not rural, regional. So those are the documents that they'll draft for us so that we can put in place to apply for the next phase of transit money.
I'm sorry, were they gonna draft, they'll draft the application as well?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
For both the MMOF money, transit specific, and then also the 5311 funding from the Federal Transit Authority. And so the reason that we had to do this today is because the Federal Transit Authority 5311 grant application is due July 5th. The pre-application is due July 5th. So we'll be working on that in the next week to get that in before the deadline of July 5th. But we've worked really closely so far with our CDOT representative, Mariah Moon, and she's been really great to assist us with that. She took Brody's spot or has been filling in for Brody while they have a vacancy. So
Right.
These are our next steps.
Sounds good.
Anybody? Yeah, okay. That's
What-
easier.
Yeah. Would it make, so we talked with yesterday on our meeting on like bus shelter, bus stop things. We have yet to determine whether like this would be a better place for
So that,
specific things like that to fall versus the other MMOF. We don't really know yet.
so I think, and they'll be able to answer this for us, but it may be able to fall into that capital funding. But I'm not 100% sure if that is restricted to vehicles only, or if that would include like a bus shelter.
Okay.
Because I think ideally what we'd like, what would make the most sense is to figure out a way to put bus shelters like at the mobile home parks outside of town, and then at one place in town, or develop like a park and ride by Dutch Henry or something like that, or community field, and then have those shelters in place there as well. But I don't know if that falls under the same category.
I mean, the way I was thinking of doing the other one was strictly on planning and
Yep.
design, not building anything, just to keep the cost down.
So it's different.
So I think it's different, but
Different
they
pots.
need to, yeah, they're
And
different
different
pots
scope.
and different scope, but they would, I mean, and I definitely in the application was gonna call out the meshing with this.
Mhm.
So conceivably, I think some design cost could be covered by the other MMOF application,
Mhm.
but not actually physically building anything.
Got it.
Like it's, for example, if we wanted to pursue something at Dutch Henry, it would be covered by that design and planning.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're gonna need to talk to each other, right? 'Cause
Yes.
Like this is gonna have to say where the stops want to be.
Yeah,
But then the other one could conceivably help like mesh that with other sort of access point considerations or restriping or whatever. Pedestrian, connecting the bus shelter to a pedestrian access, so it's not just like sitting out in the middle
yeah,
of something you can't actually walk safely to.
yeah.
So I think, yeah, they just need to talk to each other.
Okay.
But again, at least the way I was anticipating the other one is that it would stop at design costs.
And wouldn't incorporate any kind of physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. But this will allow us to apply for some physical infrastructure money. And Sydney and Jason have prepared for us kind of a breakdown of what matching will look like for Federal Transit Authority money and MMOF money. And talk us through that when they get here.
Okay.
Do you know offhand if those pots include the design money for that infrastructure?
I don't know.
Yeah, because all grants are always different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know that the MMOF money is a much broader scope than anything from federal transit. And it's my understanding is that it's much more lenient with the scope of work that you can do with those funds compared to federal transit
Seemed
funds.
really open-ended. Yeah.
Yeah, so like 5311 is pretty like black and white with what you can do
Yeah.
and what you can consider operational and non-operational. But MMOF is pretty open to how you connect this down to an operational or an admin piece. And then there's different matching requirements for them too. So
Yeah.
we can talk through that as well. But this is just really the scope to have that contract amendment with Fehr Peers, so that since we've worked through the feasibility study with them, it just makes the most sense at this point, since there's so much momentum and there's that limited time period between the pre-application
No, I think that-
for us to have them continue to do that work with us. It just makes the most sense for efficiency purposes. So
Sure.
cool. Anybody have any additional questions on the scope of the proposal?
Sorry, I'm just trying to kill time.
No, you're good.
Can't think of anything.
No, it's good. Take a quick 5-minute break before they get here at 2:30 and
So is this funding for like actual buses?
Yeah, so the 53, 5339 capital funds would be for buses.
And we would have to figure out operating expenses.
So what they have in their plan, or what in the feasibility plan, will have an estimate of what the implementation and the operating costs would be.
Gotcha.
And so then that they'll be able to help us through with this grant submittal, really what to ask for, so that we don't ask for more money than we need or too little money. Hey, Sydney.
Hi.
Hi, we were just walking through your proposal. We don't have any questions on the proposal, and then we can go through kind of the feasibility study and what we would ask for in the 5311 and 5339 grant, and just and the 5339 capital funding, what that could be used for. So if we'll just take a vote on your scope and proposal quickly, and then we can move into you talking us through some of those pieces.
Okay, great. That sounds good. And Jason should be joining us. I realize it's a little before 2:30, so he'll probably hop on right around 2:30.
Okay,
Thank you.
sounds good. Thanks, Sydney. Does anybody have any questions for Sydney while we're on the proposal itself?
I guess just a couple questions, like I don't know what's possible, but like just looking around the county, we have like the full circle buses and the senior center buses, and the school district has buses. Like, sort of, is there any way, or is it just like legally impossible to share buses across different services? Like those senior center buses seem to sit there a lot of the day.
They're only used for
Yeah,
trips, I think.
yeah.
I don't
That
think they're
can be
used so
scheduled
often.
around, yeah.
So, I mean, just, again, I can also completely see how you'll never write the IGA, to share, to figure that out.
Yeah,
Or share liability or whatever.
yeah.
It's a good question.
But yeah.
Sydney, have you guys explored that at all? I think we've touched on that a time or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can talk more in depth about options for that today. I think you would want to make sure that one of those vehicles could be, the priority and the number one mission of that vehicle being a service around, this transit service. And when those other services operate, having taking a vehicle from those services could be challenging. So it would just depend on kind of when those vehicles are used, and if it overlaps or doesn't overlap with the times that you would need to use a vehicle. I think Jason will know more, so he can speak to this a little later, but a possibility could be that you purchase, a specific vehicle, and then have an agreement with those other vehicle owners that those vehicles could be used as backup if the primary vehicle was in the shop or something like that. So that maybe could be an option. But if there is going to be conflict between the vehicle and the other things that it's already being used for, that would probably be pretty tough, because you'll really want to, in order for this service to be successful, you want to make sure it can be really consistent. And vehicles aren't getting just pulled for other reasons. So that's kind of my thought on that idea, but I think Jason can probably speak more specifically to what other considerations you would need for that kind of agreement. And I think it could also, so something to consider, obviously the maintenance, kind of ongoing storage, those costs of vehicles are something to consider, but the FTA will cover 80% of a new vehicle. So in terms of the types of things that the cost that'll be incurred, that's one where grant funding does cover quite a bit of the acquiring the vehicle. Hi, Jason. I logged on a couple minutes early and we're in on it. So they reviewed the proposal and we're just kind of asking a few questions. Their first question was around, can you hear, are you like logged into the audio? Okay, cool. Their first question was around vehicles that already exist. So for the senior center service, and the school vehicles, things like that. If there is a way to kind of partner with those organizations on kind of sharing those vehicles, my thought was perhaps for a backup vehicle that could be an option, but that might be tough to navigate conflicting priorities and ensure that this transit service could run reliably if you're having to kind of fit in with the needs of a different organization's vehicle use. Any thoughts on that?
There we go. Is it frozen? Oh,
Can you hear us?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Hi.
Hey, Jason, do you have any thoughts or information with what Sydney was talking about? So we have some MOUs and IGAs currently in place with like the senior center and Full Circle around vehicle use right now because they own some vans and like a Davy coach. And we were talking about if those vehicles could be utilized in any of this operational transit plan, or if there's anything stopping us from using those as part of the fleet, I guess, if you will.
No, there's nothing stopping you, assuming that you've got agreements in place and insurance in place. You know, there's nothing stopping you from that standpoint. Do you know if they're accessible vehicles? Do they have a wheelchair lift or ramp?
I think just the one for the senior center does.
Yeah.
Are there two for the senior center?
Too, yeah.
I think there is too.
Yeah. You know, we for this initial service have two vehicles specified, one as a primary and one as a spare. So I could see, you know, possibly those, you know, being spare vehicles or these one of the spare vehicles that you would need. But it's usually challenging to share vehicles with a route service because, you know, it's you need the vehicle day in, day out for the whole day, every day except weekends. So I would hesitate because it's challenging to coordinate that, and it could, you know, unless there's really clear expectations about when the vehicle might be available. But your usage for a route service for this new transit service would far exceed the needs of any other, you know, service that is using vehicles very sporadically. So, you know, they might find that they're not able to access a vehicle when they need it. Or, you know, you might find that you have challenges at certain times when the primary agency wants to use it. So it could be challenging. I think it only works well if there's clear delineation on days of the week. Let's say you had a 3-day-a-week service and operating Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's not what we're recommending. But And then Tuesday, Thursdays were available for senior center trips or other uses, then that would be good. But I think a route service is going to put a lot more miles on a vehicle, so it and a wear and tear. So it's usually not something that works out too well, because it's just you need a vehicle dedicated. But I could see it for the spare.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't mean to send us down a rabbit hole, and that just seemed like
no,
we have 2 accessible buses, and I mean, the seniors, I mean, we should own those, right?
you
Yeah,
do outright, yes. Yeah.
I mean, they're county vehicles,
Yeah,
so
although I did hear Sydney, you said it sounded like you were saying leveraging the funding available at an 80-20 split for like
Yeah.
capital purchasing is maybe the easiest,
Yeah.
like,
yeah,
or the
right. it's not
biggest
pretty
bang for the
cost.
buck
Yeah.
of, opportunities to take advantage of. So I hear
Yeah.
that.
yeah, I don't know if you, Jason and Sydney, just want to go, I mean, we haven't, okay. What's the best way to do this, you guys?
Let's vote. You want to just take the vote on the motion on the table to
Yeah.
approve the amendment, and then we
Yes.
can go into whatever they were gonna present,
Yeah,
like overall.
does that work for you guys, Jason and Sydney?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have the presentation that we were previewed with you last week, Kayla. So
Yeah.
We're ready.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so I'll accept a motion for their proposal for $16,000.
Did we make a motion?
No, I don't think we did. Did we make a motion, Cindy? No.
Oh, all right. Can we?
Can you I don't have the agenda in front of me. Pull up what we're.
Oh, yeah, it's a contract amendment for Fehr Peers for continuation on transit implementation.
Okay, I move that we approve the contract amendment with Fehr Peers to add on to their existing contract, and this would be for grant support and development of federal transit administrative compliant policies and procedures for a new transit program in Lake County.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
Not for me.
No, thank you.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
All right, thank you very much, you guys, we appreciate it. Cool, so Jason and Cindy, I'm gonna hand it over to you. You should be able to share your screen. Do that. Sorry, you guys.
No problem. Let me share. See if this works.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Yeah, let me just make one adjustment here. Let's see. Okay, great. Just have to get my screens in order here.
You're good.
Okay, great. You can see it and you can hear me. We good?
Yep.
All right, great. So yeah, we wanted to present the preferred alternative for the Lake County Transit Service. It really is alternative one from the 3 alternatives presented, which is the deviated fixed route. You're all aware of presentations we made to the community back in early April, late March, early April, and followed that up with presentations to you, Board of County Commissioners, and as well to the Leadville City Council. So got good input there. And then our online community survey, which, Sydney, do you want to hit on that in terms of kind of the reach of that survey?
Yes, absolutely. So we got, I'm sorry, I should have had these stats pulled up in front of me. Let me get them pulled up real quick.
Yeah, I was trying to think it was a more targeted survey.
Yeah, I have some of the stats here. But yeah, we actually ended up having a really good response. We partnered with Lake County Builder Generation and the community connectors to kind of get that survey out there. I know that Kayla also passed it on to his contacts at in the school district. So we had students taking it as well. So overall had a really good response rate and got some really good information. We had 128 responses in English, 15 responses in Spanish, but of all the participants, just about a third identified as Hispanic or Latinx, which was a big kind of target population when we started the survey, to make sure that we were really hearing from that population and getting some more input on service and what would be helpful for them. As well as kind of people more broadly. We got a pretty good cross section as well from different communities. So within Leadville, in the Leadville North area, the 3 manufactured home parks outside of the city, and got pretty good representation across those groups. And so the survey looked at, as Jason mentioned, the type of service people wanted to see. So at the community meeting, this deviated fixed route was most preferable. That came across strong in the survey as well. As you can see on that graphic on the screen, 2/3 of people said they would prefer a route that kind of ran at standard times rather than the on-demand route, which was more kind of a Lyft and Uber hybrid, where you actually have to call the service to you when you need it. Another thing that came out of the survey was the kind of response of how often people would ride if the service was free. And we saw a shift of people using it between 1 and 2 days a week go down, and the amount of people that said they would never use the service go up if it was to be if there was a fare associated with the service. So in terms of ridership numbers, which isn't surprising, the fare free service seems to be kind of more preferable. This also just makes sense in terms of the size of this service. Once you start having to do all the accounting and collect fare collection and deciding if you're going to have discounted passes, all of that stuff can take a lot of money as well. So that's just something that we wanted to kind of bring to the forefront, and that was interesting with the survey. Also, for the people who identified as Hispanic or Latino, there was a much higher discrepancy between the fare being free and then fewer people saying they would ride less often or never if the fare cost a dollar. So just considerations in terms of equity and ridership and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think you'll probably get more into the specifics of service, but overall great response rate. And I think heard from a good cross section of people based on neighborhood, race and ethnicity, age, that kind of stuff.
Great. So really strong support and consensus when it came to which of the 3 ideas we present. Of the 3 ideas, which one was most preferred. So the preferred alternative in this again is alternative 1 that we developed with some small tweaks that we can talk about as we go through, but combines fixed route with a deviation zone. It allows one vehicle to serve the route and the required zone around the route, which is the required by the Americans with Disabilities Act, 3/4 of a mile on either side of that route. But anyone could request the deviation. You wouldn't have to qualify to request that. So anyone who couldn't make it to one of the established bus stops could request a deviation. So I think that's important for accessibility overall. It allows the route to provide flexibility in that you don't have to build a route guessing where people might need to ultimately be dropped off or picked up, because that zone really does cover all of town and key areas within the county. And so it really does provide nice coverage combined with the route convenience that we heard about from folks. Any questions on that? And this is just the preliminary route and zone. We need to refine this and make sure that we've got it kind of exactly at 3/4 and make some adjustments too if we think that 3/4 of a mile cuts off certain areas and we want to make sure that we include those areas. We can push out a little bit further in certain areas to have larger deviation zone.
Yeah.
I feel like I remember someone suggesting or thinking about making it a loop that will come down 9 to 5A. And then it could like hit the golf course and you could even like walk up to Turquoise Lake from there. I wonder if is that something that we could sort of adjust on our own, or
you could. The caution I guess I would give is that for a route to work well, a linear route that operates in both directions is important, because if you were to think about running this as a loop, and hopefully you can see my cursor because I think kind of drawing out the general loop that you're describing and that I remember hearing about, Jeff, is that with one bus it would have to be running in a single direction, which means if you want to get, if you're here at point A and you want to get to downtown, let's say it's running clockwise, A to C, great, no problem, right? But going home, you have to go C, D, E, F, and whatever other stuff you would have. So it almost necessitates by design a second bus and really, would double your costs. I hear that perception of need out here. I question the return on investment you might have in that area. I think you would be challenged to justify that from a ridership standpoint. I would think about, if anything, would maybe play with making your zone a little bit bigger and see if those deviations happen at all. But I would think about that probably down the road once you have this route and zone kind of dialed in, because this, we drove this and I kind of remember the nature of these roads and things. No traffic, obviously, but winter conditions could be challenging on some of these roads. And I think if you push this zone too far towards Turquoise Lake, then it could be hard to keep this route on schedule, because we have to allow enough time for deviation. So I think it's the demand is likely there for some level of service, but I would kind of look at that down the road after you get this base level of service operating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we can address that kind of in our final plan and talk about, the improvements going forward.
Is the mobile home park when you come in?
Mountain Valley
Yeah.
States?
Yeah.
And here's one thing, we did drive this little segment. We timed it. It's going to be better, easier, and quicker to actually come down, hit B, and then go back. So that I think this segment of road is a bit concerning, mainly for it just, it would be hard on a bus. I think it could, it's a little bit unimproved, I guess I would say, after being
That egress, right?
Yeah. And this is really, I think, quick and easy to make. So you'd still go A, B, C, and C, B, A, you'd run that kind of both directions, but the routing would be that you would come in here and turn around and go back. So I don't, it doesn't affect timing. But 1 hour frequency, meaning that, top of the hour, the bus would be at A, bottom of the hour. And I think I've got that actually. We can show that where you have, this kind of rough schedule, a little bit of recovery time on the end. So you see it runs A to F and then runs northbound F to A. So the bus has 5 minutes between here and 5 minutes between here to recover. And that would be, and we've got to refine this a little bit, but just gives you an example of what we do and allows, like, you could look at this and go, wow, it doesn't take 5 minutes to get from here to here. But what this allows you is the deviation. So it's more of an average time, which means that, the bus, especially at stops kind of C and D, and depending on how you might operate it and how you time it, the bus might have to sit and wait if there isn't any deviations. Let's say there's 1 or 2 deviations every other hour, then you're going to have those times where you have a little bit too much time built into the schedule, but that's just the nature of the deviated fixed route.
Does it deviate? Is the request for pickup only?
Yes, you would allow drop-offs to the drive. Yeah.
Sorry, that's correct. It's only for
That's
pickup?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, for pickups only, because drop-offs could be made, to the driver in real time. Just to say, hey, I need to get dropped off at the high school or at the hospital or whatever it might be. So
What's D, the courthouse?
Yeah,
yeah, there's an existing stop there.
3rd Street or
Yeah.
And then
Tabor, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
C and C.
C is Safeway area. We know that that's one that we need to kind of think about a little bit more and get input from you all. It's a challenging stop, I think. Well, at least from their perspective.
Yeah, I think currently like Summit Stage and Eco just pull into the parking lot and there's not really any structure in the parking lot.
Yeah.
It gets a little crazy sometimes with the bus there. But yeah, something
And
to consider. Go ahead, Sydney.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I think another issue which wouldn't concern this service probably as much or at all, but the Safeway not liking that their parking lot turns into a de facto parking ride for the regional routes was something we heard through outreach. So that's something to consider in terms of the future of the stop in that area. That's how folks are kind of using it now, and that Safeway, depending on the management, it's not always amenable to that use of their parking lot.
Yeah.
So continuing along, and I'll send this out to you all. So we, it's probably hard to read, I'm guessing. But this gives you a sense that, you're around a $280,000 service if it were to be operated with a turnkey vendor. And that's assuming $100 per, $100 per vehicle service hour, which, may or may not be achievable. I think we have some concerns about the availability of vendors to take on a service like this that in kind of the scheme of things is relatively small. Most, private contractor operators would want to see something more like 500,000 a year. And I've seen some projects lately where some vendors are not looking at projects under $1 million a year in revenue. So that's a consideration that, that $100, I would have told you a year ago that you could have possibly gotten $75 an operating hour. But and that would have been achievable with a contract operator, but that is more challenging today. And this assumes that you would have a vehicle that you're supplying. So if the vendor has to supply a vehicle, that I wouldn't be surprised to see that more like $125 a vehicle service hour, which is essentially just 25% higher across the board here. Vehicle branding is included in this. You might have that included in the cost of the vehicle, so that might not be something that would show up in your operating budget. This is the operating budget, not the capital budget. But you'd want to market heavily in the first couple of years, and then kind of have a lower level of marketing promotion long term. And MMOF is front loaded, and in this, given the large pool of MMOF funding that's available right now. But there would be some long-term MMOF funding available, but 5311 would also come online to support this. I think when you get beyond kind of year 3, it's the share between MMOF and 5311 could look different depending on the somewhat of the direction of CDOT and also where the TPR might want to take funding. They might want MMOF to go more towards infrastructure projects going forward. And 5311 is relatively strong and stable for the foreseeable future, so that could be larger than projected here. So. But you see that, the local contribution of around $70,000 to $80,000 a year, I think is close. So this, again, it's kind of a draft budget. We'll refine this going forward. But I can show you how, this, if you were to just operate it as a county-run service, the cost, and this is at $70 per vehicle service hour, that you certainly save some money and would require less overall. So you go from 1.4 million over the 5 years to right around $1 million over the 5 years if the county were to operate it. And again, I don't know, you would maybe have to do some thinking with your budget folks to see if that is achievable, in what entry-level pay might be. We can certainly estimate things like maintenance and fuel. So that I think is a key question for us here, and it's coming up here in terms of discussion for today. But turnkey model, does operate a lot or offer a lot of advantages. With a vendor, you could implement quickly, potentially not have capital costs if you required a vendor to provide vehicles, and they typically have expertise and scale that they bring. And experience. I think that's that's inherent in that expertise, is they have the experience. Likely higher operating costs, and gives you less flexibility and control. One thing that's not on here is that the money is probably going outside the county and not staying in the county. I know that was something we heard from you all and from the city in our presentation there, and from others from the general public, that gee, wouldn't it be great to be able to use this service to provide employment opportunities. But whether it's a vendor or whether it's the county, at least today, finding drivers is challenging. We're trying to design a service that would operate within a smaller vehicle, so you wouldn't have to have a CDL. But that's finding employees regardless is challenging. And then capital costs, again, capital costs have gone way up for these smaller, what we call cutaway buses. They're now, what used to be around $100,000 vehicle is now at least $150,000 to maybe $170,000 each. So you're looking at a total of $300,000 to $340,000 for these vehicles. That translates to 60 to $68,000 match, at 20%. You could try for that. 20% would be 5339 funded. Your MMOF rate is 25%.
Mhm.
Correctly. You could try for both and see if the vehicles get funded in one place, then you can, not execute on a grant through the other source. Bus stop signage, benches, improvements. I think that we want to include some in there. They might not be able to happen right away. They also connect to some of the other pedestrian improvements and crossing improvements that you all have been looking at and talking to CDOT through the infrastructure side of MMOF. So,
Jason, I think we had a question about that. If bus shelters would be considered any kind of capital, or if that's only for vehicles or bus shelters, or if that is through the infrastructure side of MMOF.
Almost, but well, certainly through 5339, bus shelters are part of that, and I can't say with 100% certainty, but I think that they're part of MMOF as well.
Okay, so if we applied for 5339, we could apply for money to construct a bus shelter.
Correct.
Like at the mobile home parks or wherever we found a spot in town.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and that's typically, the cost to do a shelter with the costs of the site work is somewhere around $20,000 to $25,000 a location, but depends a little bit on the shelter design. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a little less than I was expecting it to cost overall. That's good. Could we apply for a 5339 grant for bus shelters, like as a kind of an ancillary piece of this project? Because we need them regardless.
Well, I wonder if that's a conversation with Summit Stage too, because we started that conversation a while ago, but we never got very far.
Right.
So their transition, so maybe we could apply, or Summit Stage could apply for our. Yeah.
Okay.
Or if there's like more work, because we were talking before about, we don't really know where, like one of that Safeway stop, if we do find another location for that's going to be some work to actually get like a park and ride parking lot and shelter. So maybe that discussion is on the stage.
Yeah.
And rail yards.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But we could do that. How does that work? Would we have to have the site plans done before we apply for the 5339 money for bus shelter?
No, you wouldn't have to have, construction drawings done. It would be helpful to have control of wherever the shelter is going to go. So it would be helpful ahead of time to have either an easement or the actual land, or through some sort of agreement, whatever it might be. That's what I would suggest, but before applying, is that you have the location defined and you have some sort of continuing control over the land that the shelter is going to sit on. That's definitely a requirement for FTA funding. I don't know about MMOF, but FTA wants to know that for the life of the asset, it's going to remain as a public transit asset. And I think bus shelters are maybe a 15 or 20-year asset. So, if you have some sort of easement, it would have to have a pretty long time horizon.
Okay.
But if it's in city or county right of way, that's easy, right? Even CDOT right of way is relatively easy to get an agreement with them.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, I guess I wouldn't. That's ideal. I probably would still think about, even if they're not completely nailed down in terms of some of those details, that you might want to take a shot at it. But Sydney, do you know in the MMOF, did that come up about bus infrastructure? I know facilities are talked about for maintenance, but
I believe, and this wasn't in our most recent conversation, so I will need to double check this, but my memory from a separate conversation I had about the MMOF grant is that you have to have some sort of agreement in place for right-of-way acquisition plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be finished, but there has to be some kind of concrete agreement that land can be secured, whether it's an easement or right-of-way acquisition or something like that, or obviously if you have it owned. But yeah, I think you do have to have some sort of more formalized movement in that direction, but it doesn't have to have been completed. Okay.
and it is eligible for MMOF.
The bus
The
shelter.
Yeah, any sort of bus stop improvements.
Again, I think I would want to confirm. I'll write these
Okay.
notes down and I can confirm, but from my understanding of MMOF, I would be surprised if they weren't covered, because it seems very inclusive of almost all multimodal infrastructure and transit infrastructure and capital. The one thing that we did learn from CDOT is that if you're going to go for MMOF funds for both the operations and the vehicles, or maybe vehicles and bus shelters, that it's the same application, but we would need to submit separately for a operations funds, like an operations grant and a capital grant, if that makes sense. Was what Moira and Tim at CDOT said about that, about applying for both of those types of funds through that one grant.
Which would also be separate from your infrastructure funds. So we'd have three separate applications or letters of interest to them.
Well, can we, Jason, could you go back to your first cost projection slide?
20,000.
So, well, yeah, but or for both of these, if Eagle County creates regional transportation authority, and then at some point in year 3 or 4, it is appealing for Lake County to join that, does that impact any applications for MMOF or FTA funding?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't cause any, sort of qualification issues. You could head down the road of, that we're defining here of starting a new transit service. You could begin operating it, and if years down the road you decide, okay, we want to be a part of EVTA, then it requires a vote. It comes with a taxation mechanism, which generates revenue, and which would be, there'd be some estimation for what Lake County is putting in, but all of the assets maybe that you have at that point for, say, operating transit service, like vehicles, could be transferred to the new transit authority. And that's a relatively easy process. Let's say that, the Federal Transit Administration is buying those vehicles. As long as they know that they're going to remain in public transit service, it's an administrative process to get those assigned to a different agency, and it's pretty painless. The shelters and things like that, I've seen where, they can stay under the ownership of the county long-term, as long as they're in the use of public transit. So the transit authority does not have to assume any of the physical improvements, unless it were a maintenance facility. Then you might want to go through that process. But any sort of shelters and things, I see kind of patchworks of where individual cities will own the shelters and handle the grant process associated with getting those built. But equipment, vehicles are, would need to move over.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no risk there to,
Did you-
whether you start it as a county service and then potentially change it into a part of the new RTA.
Okay.
No, I was just gonna say, it sounds like one of those. Let's not worry about a problem we don't have yet.
In the very small places we can say that.
No, it's good to know if there's like a hard no on doing it one way or the other.
Right,
Yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, we can't join the regional authority for 10 years because we did it this way.
yeah,
I don't get
yeah,
No, the key is on any of this, and I have seen it happen, is that you have to make sure that everything you do relative to your service is FTA compliant from the beginning, regardless of whether you have FTA, and that's Federal Transit Administration, which is a division of the U.S. Department of Transportation. You want to make sure it's compliant from the very beginning, even if you don't have FTA funds funding the service from the beginning. And that's because if you want to make any change, or if you want to start receiving FTA operating dollars, and let's say you have a contractor in place, they may say, well, we're not going to pay for your service because you contracted with that contractor through a procurement process that was not FTA compliant. So you have to make sure that that's compliant from the beginning. And that's just one example, so that you don't have problems when, you're going from just a state funding pot like MMOF, and then wanting to add federal funding to it down the line. Kind of like we show here, with FTA funds coming in year 3. We just want to make sure that, everything, and CDOT will ensure that, but it's just a reminder that, you have to be, and that's everything from like civil rights, Title VI to ADA, drug and alcohol policies, all of those things that are described in the additional scope of work that you all just approved. So.
Anything else on that specifically?
No.
do we need to try to make a decision or steer towards one operating structure or another today for the applications, or?
I think so, yeah, ideally what we'd like to do is think about what we would prefer for us to go through for our pre-application application.
Okay.
As weird as that is.
Yeah.
Again, it could change based on the economy, it could change on availability. Several things, but Jason, is there a recommendation that you would give to us over one over the other?
I don't.
Okay.
I would just,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna bail you out.
Sorry.
I think,
I would say I look at it from the rider perspective, and there's no difference, right? So it doesn't, it usually comes down to, well, I'll say like in Moab, for example, we just, we did a transit implementation project for Moab, Utah. And they kind of said from the beginning, like, we don't know transit, we don't want to get involved in it. It's not, something we want to add to our plate. We have limited resources. So they were they wanted to go with a turnkey contractor from the beginning. We have supported their RFP process. We just did a call a week and a half ago on a pre-proposal and had, I think, 4 or 5 vendors on the call. So I think they're going to get some good responses, but they're going to pay more and they're okay with that. So I think it comes down to capacity and budget, right? If you have the capacity, you think you've got the capacity to take it on, then I think it's a better way to go to operate it as a county operated service. It does give you more control and you will save some money, but it puts some more burden and headaches, on your shoulders, because Otherwise, you put that on a vendor and they have to do it, but they want to make money at it. And again, it does come back to the potential. The Moab example is at, I want to say it's at a $675,000 a year service. So, it's a little more interesting, I think, from a dollar standpoint for a vendor. So I do have that concern that let's call it a $300,000 a year service is for Lake County. Will it get the attention of vendors? I don't know. So that's my concern.
And if there are no fare fees, then it's just a negotiation of a long-term agreement between county contributions, and that's really what's affecting the revenue generated for a turnkey operation. I mean, I guess I don't, and the granting to cover the costs, but then what's the percentage of profit that's likely if there are no fares
To the county?
to a turnkey vendor? Like what's
I think
to make it attractive?
I think the county would just cover the costs, the overage for them to.
Yeah, typically you just have you have typically a vendor doesn't want to take on any sort of they'd be happy to take the fare revenue, right? But I think fare revenue is hard to predict, so it's something that vendors are typically not willing to risk, some sort of calculation on fares as part of their payback. So typically it's just a fixed operating cost per hour where they'll say, okay, for every hour of service that we operate, it's $100 or $125 or $150, and that's what you pay for. And then how you pay for that is on you. And if it's fare free, then you don't have that revenue source, and that puts more on a grant and the local contribution, because fares just get deducted off the top. So if your service is costing you with a vendor $350,000, you're getting $50,000 in fares, then you've got to come up with $300,000 between CDOT, federal, and local. So the vendor doesn't care. In most agreements I see, the vendor, they'll collect fares, right? And they'll report them. So let's say they are operating it and there's a fare and every passenger is putting $1 in the fare box. Then they're responsible as part of their contract to say, okay, well, we collected, $1,000 in fares this month. And then you say, okay, great. So there's got to be a level of trust there, but
are you thinking of Summit at stage as a turnkey vendor?
I don't know if that's an option.
No, I didn't know.
I don't know if that's an option. We could explore it being an option, I think, but I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel super strongly one way or the other, but that makes me nervous to commit to being turnkey and then just not getting bids, and I do I like the idea of having operational control over it, so that it seems like as we learn how this is actually working and being used by the community, being able to adjust the routes a little bit, it seems like it'll be easier if we're running it than if we have to renegotiate the agreement with the vendor.
Right.
So,
Yep.
Well, like so many other things, I wish, we are thinking it'd be nice if we had that kind of control, if we just had the bandwidth. And I hadn't thought about Summit Stage, and that actually makes me feel a lot better about a turnkey vendor versus.
Which I don't know is an option, but Jason, but to the two questions that Jason has on right here, what does that do to our liability and casualty property insurance? Would the CDOT and FTA funding cover those cost increases?
Great question. The cost of insurance needs to, under a Lake County model, needs to be explored. There is and I'm blanking on is it CISRA? What's the state insurance pool?
CTSI.
Okay. there's all of the transit agencies within the state are typically on the municipal insurance. So I would check with your, because are you on a county insurance pool for the state?
Yeah,
Okay, then they should be familiar with transit and they should be able to let you know whether that in fact affects your premium or not.
We can also ask the city to contribute to the county match portion.
okay.
Yes.
So that could be a portion of like if the county's match is $50,000, we can ask for the city to cover $25,000 of that to provide service within the city limits.
Just have no stops downtown.
Because I mean, I think between. Excuse me.
Bless you.
They don't have to have a CDL. I mean, I know that would be. Testing and stuff, right, for them to be a driver, but. You know, like school bus drivers, at least for 3 or 4 months out of the year, we have drivers. I mean, I don't know, maintenance has capacity to take on another.
Well, we did talk to Paul Anderson about that too, like, there's the
okay.
drivers were currently in the school district work, like what, 4 hours a day or whatever, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. So there may be opportunity for us to have a driver cover like a midday shift from the school district and then
Okay,
have somebody cover those exterior shifts of like early morning and later afternoon. But some partnership there with the school district as well with drivers that are already familiar with operating vehicles.
And Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but one nice thing about the cutaway buses is they don't require a CDL. So they require other, right, Jason?
Correct.
Okay, so they,
Yep.
there would still be other, in terms of FTA compliance, other things that would come into play. But that could make it easier for you all to find drivers locally compared to the issues with finding drivers at other
Guess
agencies.
you can drive a bus.
Every county employee does a shift.
Right.
Right there. Out there.
What could go wrong?
Live hearing from the public. Seriously.
Okay.
I drove a mail truck. I mean. Not really. the same. There you go.
I can reach out to our insurance to see what an estimated impact would be on our premiums. Do we have to have expanded liability insurance?
If you're meeting, the insurance that you have on what would be a similar activity like snowplows, for any of your vehicle operations, is sufficient. But I don't know what those exact numbers are relative to Colorado, state requirements, but we can do a little research on that.
Okay.
I think at this point, some of these details will come in our final plan as we move towards the grant application. We probably want to be as conservative as possible as to the cost of this service, so that you could apply for sufficient funding, whether you are, if the question of county operated versus contractor operated is maybe unresolved. I think we just go with the higher cost and build a request around that.
You guys do work with Summit Stage, or I'd love to reach out to them too and just start that conversation and see if that's an
Yeah,
opportunity for expansion.
Jason and Sydney
Yeah.
just did it's like an equity report. Is that what you did with Summit Stage, Jason?
Correct.
Yeah.
This
And
is really Sydney did.
Sydney did, and it analyzed our route as well. So we could reach out to Summit Stage before we submit this grant application to talk to them.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we know Chris well, Chris Lubers, and yeah, I mean, I think it's worth a quick, would you be even interested, right? I mean, that's
Right.
some agencies right now may say like, no way, no how, we can't think about anything new, or yeah, maybe, I think those are the two responses you might get. I don't think you'd get an enthusiastic yes, but I think you'd get a maybe or a hell no. Would probably be your two responses.
Yeah, I think it'll be good we can reach out to Chris and kind of get that conversation started. And just see, I think a couple of things that come to my mind that might make that less feasible is just the issues that they've experienced just hiring and retaining drivers. And now this last season, they've had just a lot of kind of short staffing challenges. So it might be more around that for them. Just in terms of they think they could find folks to staff around, but maybe if it wasn't a CDL employee or they could kind of look more locally in Lake County, maybe that would change things, but just something to keep in mind. But I think it's a good thing to explore. So we'll, I made a note and we'll definitely connect with Chris and start to make that connection. So you all can talk through options.
Okay.
But I will say, like, built into, if you, under this estimate at $70 a vehicle hour, if you consider wage for the driver, if I were to break that down for you, probably about half of that is going to driver plus benefits. So, let's call it $35 an hour going to driver plus benefits. About 20% of that is going to admin overhead, support, which is gonna, and maybe it needs to be a little higher, but maybe $15 or $20 per hour. So that kind of points to like, oh, okay, you've probably got, maybe a half-time to three-quarter-time FTE kind of supporting things, but I think that's reasonable. And then, maintenance and fuel would come in at probably about 10 to 15 an hour. And then, some of the insurance cost, I think is something that would be good to know and may affect that cost. But my point is that the $70 bakes in, per every hour the vehicle's running is, we're estimating it at $70. So it includes a lot more than just the driver. But we may need to be even more conservative with that. And, a turnkey operator this is built around $100 an hour. So it could be good for us to play with some scenarios on, maybe pushing this as high as 130 an hour, just to have a top end to what the service might cost and then what an MMOF grant needs to look like.
Okay. And then go ahead, Sydney.
I was going to say, just to clarify, Jason, for the grant application, at least the MMOF, which is the most urgent one.
Yes.
It sounds like we don't necessarily need to have who will operate it
Correct.
nailed down, but just the scale of funds needed either way is what's key. Okay.
Yeah, great point.
Jason, I don't know if this is helpful. The base salary at the county is $40,000, but a majority of my staff is between like 40 and 56,000. So it'd be quite challenging to hire a bus driver for $50K for everybody who's in my $40,000 range. Just if that helps with calculations for
That is helpful. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So we're putting together an application and then it's due July 5th, but I would be happy to bring the dollar amount and the application to our meeting on the 5th, if that is appropriate. Just so that you guys can see the application and
Yeah, so
if you'd
I'll
like.
follow up on insurance costs
Okay.
and then I can give like a broad salary breakdown. just where the majority of people are.
Okay. That'd be good. If that sounds good with you guys.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have your burden rate, I mean, we typically use about 30% as for overhead with any employee. So if you kind of benefits, basically.
I think that's similar to what we've been using, Jason, as well.
Okay. Great.
Great.
Anything else for Jason and Sydney, or Jason and Sydney, do you have anything else for us, or Jeff, do you have any questions?
And I think, my recommendation on the question about vehicles is that you might as well go ahead and apply for the vehicles in MMOF, and then we can also just apply within 5339 and decide which way to go there. So unless there's thinking that you wouldn't want to have to come up with a match, the 20% match on the vehicles.
So for the vehicles, for the
Or
25% for MMOF,
25%.
yeah, the match could be ARPA funds, right? ARPA funds
Correct.
for MMOF, but not for 5339 funds, because we can't match federal money with federal money.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So that's,
And
yep.
I mean, we already essentially own public transit vehicles, maybe not technically, but yeah, I don't think we're averse to owning the vehicles.
Yeah. So if we, because even if we do like a turnkey and we own the vehicles, would that be an issue, Jason or Sydney?
No,
Seems like,
you can definitely do that, and it would bring that hourly operating cost down,
Okay.
for the turnkey operator.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, could maybe open up your options to operators. I don't know, Jason, if you have a sense of that. If the operator doesn't have to worry about finding enough vehicles to cover the service for more employees, it's possible that would make it more appealing to some operators. Don't quote me on that, but it's possible.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
should they reach out to Summit and explore that, or who
Yeah, I think
wants to reach out to Chris?
I think Jason and Sydney and I can reach out to Summit Stage
Okay,
while
Yeah.
we go through getting this final application prepared before July 5th, and just
all right,
kind of have an idea of where they stand.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, and then we had in here, the regional stuff, the longer term, kind of how to expand the services, different areas. So that's all kind of recycled from stuff you've seen before, but would go into your final plan, and just, we're headed towards, and this is just for the original project, the final plan, with your implementation, that's coming in July, but now we have the grant application to move forward on. So
All right. Thank you.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for the input. We will make some adjustments, I think, to our estimates here. Wait to hear back from you on a couple of points for staffing and insurance, and build a more precise cost model that will inform the grant.
Well, Jason, at our next Jason and Sydney at our next check-in, then we'll talk about connecting with Summit Stage too, and just exploring that option.
Yeah, sorry. What should we? Yeah, we're happy to reach out to Summit Stage and see.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we can set up a conversation to connect with them about contracted services.
Yeah. we can definitely do that.
Cool.
Great.
Awesome.
Well,
Anything
thanks
else?
everybody. Great to see you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason and Sydney. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's see here.
I think one thing is just on that amendment, we'll just need a signed copy of that back now that it's voted on and approved. So
Yep, I'll work on getting that signed and recorded and back to you guys by tomorrow morning.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
That's helpful. Okay. Yeah, thanks, commissioners.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Is there anything else today that we need to review or touch on for our meeting before we adjourn?
I think so.
All right, so we'll adjourn today at 3:35. Thank you all very much.